Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I'd review this little video that I found to be very particularly interesting. And this is going to be, once again, another video about that of Mr. Gervonta Davis, or Mr. Abdul, I believe is his new name, because, of course, recently he converted to that of Islam. But, anyways, when it comes down to it, and I would have to look up his full new name, but at the current moment in time, I'm going to refer to him as Gervonta Davis because, of course, you guys know him as Gervonta Davis, and the majority of us do. But anyways, when it comes down to it, Gervonta Davis, of course, as of recent, he kind of had an interesting year last year, I believe, fighting that of Ryan Garcia, which is the fight that pretty much everybody wanted to see, somewhat including myself. I didn't think that Ryan Garcia was going to be probably the most skilled opponent that Gervonta Davis had on the table, but he certainly was the most popular opponent on the table, and he certainly was a guy that would have brought a lot of views and money to the fight. So I didn't really mind that fight happening. But like I've already stated about Gervonta Davis, even though I think that he's a phenomenal talent, and I think that he's one of the greater boxers out there, the problem with Gervonta Davis, just at the current moment in time, in my view, and the reason why I do not have him at the current moment in time on my top 10 pound for pound list, and certainly do not have him on my top 5 pound for pound list, is because Gervonta Davis, I just don't think that he has the resume. And I know that a lot of Gervonta Davis fans will come in my comment section and they'll say, oh, what are you talking about? Gervonta Davis has fought Mario Barrios and Isaac Pitbull Cruz and Rolly Romero and all these other guys, right? But these guys are not legitimate A-grade level fighters. And the majority of them that he's actually fought have really never even been champions and probably never will be champions. Now, you have guys like Mario Barrios or Rolly Romero, where, yeah, they can get a title, like what Rolly Romero got a title at 140 if it's a vacant title, and there's no one there for him to really face, when he finally gets that title. But is Rolly Romero really going to defeat Teofimo Lopez? Is he really going to defeat that of Devin Haney, Ryan Garcia, Josh Taylor, Regis Prograis? He's probably not going to defeat any of those guys. Rolly Romero is probably somewhere along a B minus level fighter with a C grade level skill set. It is what it is. Now, he's a great athlete and he has a great amount of punching power, but in terms of his boxing ability, it's terrible. It just is what it is. And I like Gervonta Davis. I think that, he is truly a top 10 pound for pound level talent. But in terms of what he's accomplished and in terms of the resume, I just can't put him there. And that's really the main problem with that of Gervonta Davis. But anyways, as of recent, apparently in a recent interview, Mr. Calvin Ford, who was that, I believe, Gervonta Davis's trainer, they recently talked, I believe, in an interview on that of a boxing channel or that of a boxing media site where they were talking about a potential fight with that of Shakur Stevenson. And Calvin Ford responded basically saying that he did not want that fight for Gervonta Davis at the moment. And the reason for his statement saying that is because he thinks that Shakur Stevenson, that he probably needs to build himself up a little bit more, and that the most recent fight that Shakur Stevenson was in, that it was a terrible performance. And I can't necessarily disagree with that. The last fight that Shakur Stevenson was in, it was a terrible performance. And I'm not really against boxers that, even kind of fight, I don't want to say safe, but they kind of fight a little bit more conservative in a fight in order to get the victory or the cruising victory, especially if they believe that it's a little bit too dangerous of a fight and that they need to get the victory in that type of style. But at the end of the day, Shakur Stevenson did not look did not look overall, in my view, like an A grade level fighter in that fight. He literally had nothing else but a jab in that fight and maybe a couple of right hooks every now and then. And I had certain people in my comment section telling me that they thought that Shakur Stevenson, that, he clearly won every single round. I didn't see it that way. Now, I had Shakur winning the fight, but I thought that De Los Santos, just based off of activity, especially in the early part of the fight, I gave him about 4 rounds in that fight. And the judges seen it the same exact way that I did, because I believe one or two of the judges scored it 8 rounds to 4, and even one, I believe, scored it 7 rounds to 5. So Shakur Stevenson, it definitely was not the best of performances. Now, of course, I believe that he can do better later on. But the question is, of course, about Mr. Gervonta Davis is who is he eventually going to face that is going to be on the A grade level? I don't necessarily blame him for not facing Shakur Stevenson at the moment, but there's other names out there that he could potentially face. And the question is, the LDBC and new media channels that are so prone to criticize Canelo Alvarez, Alexander Usyk, Tyson Fury, Naoya Inoue when they don't fight A-grade level competition, at least in their eyes. And I'm not always disagreeing with that level of criticism, because sometimes, you could argue maybe that they could take bigger fights depending on the fights that they're taking. But it's just very interesting. It seems that none of this criticism, at least from the LDBC and new media channels, are ever applied to that of Gervonta Davis. It seems like he's very heavily protected. But anyways, let's see overall what he has to say. Of course, this video is going to be by that of Mr. Boxing Ego, who is one of Gervonta Davis's biggest fans and supporters. Let's get straight into it.
That performance, I don't even want to think about it. It was horrible. It was a bad night for boxing that night.
It was bad, but let me ask you this, because I watched it, and it was like painfully boring, right? We all know that, but it made me think to myself. It did show that if he wants to stay away, he's like a rabbit. Like, he could stay away. So
yeah, but do the fans pay for that?
No, but what I was going to ask you was, let's say he fights Tank. Do you see any problem at all being like, if he wants to stay away, like, you can't catch him? It's really hard to catch him.
Well, why would I put Tank in a situation like that when we can't do what we do? Because right now, if Tank don't get a knockout, it's gonna. You get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
If because everybody think Tank got to knock everybody out to win a fight. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
You with me? Because that stamp is on him. That performance.
Well, listen, the thing is about Gervonta Davis is, and I somewhat get it, I get what Calvin Ford is saying. But at the end of the day, really what this translates to is that, Shakur, if you're going to be able to fight us, you're really going to have to build your brand up. You're really going to have to win some decent fights, and you're really overall going to have to get to the level where everyone is really calling for this fight. Now, of course, a lot of people are calling for this fight, but what Calvin Ford and Gervonta Davis want, they want this fight to get to the Canelo Alvarez, David Benavidez level, or the Mayweather versus Pacquiao level, or, the Ryan Garcia versus Gervonta Davis level, where basically everyone's talking about it. And, when it comes down to it, if Gervonta Davis, if he gets in the ring against Shakur Stevenson right now and looks very, very bad, or on top of that, potentially loses, because Shakur is a guy that could potentially beat Gervonta Davis at his best, then why overall would you want to get in the ring with that guy? So I kind of understand, where he's coming from. But it's just very interesting that the LDBC and new media, including that of Boxing Ego, that, they pretty much let Gervonta Davis off the hook there. Now, I personally get the perspective, I do. But it's just very interesting because there have been other fighters that have also taken this approach, like that of Canelo Alvarez and Gennady Golovkin. Like when Gennady Golovkin said that about Erislandy Lara, and the whole LDBC and new media community said, see, Gennady Golovkin is ducking and, overall avoiding that of Erislandy Lara, when it was pretty much the exact same situation. Now, Shakur is probably a bigger star than Lara, but at the end of the day, that could warrant that maybe Gervonta Davis should be able to fight Shakur Stevenson right now. Now, once again, I don't have a problem with the Shakur Stevenson fight not happening next. I understand what Calvin Ford and Gervonta Davis's perspective is. I understand. But at the end of the day, you are going to have to eventually get in the ring with A-grade level competition. And I know that, a certain amount of the Gervonta Davis fans, they're going to come at me and say, oh, Gervonta Davis, he's in charge of his career. Leave the man alone. Stop hating. Okay, well, if you want to take this perspective about Gervonta Davis, he can just fight any B or C grade level Mexican or Guatemalan fighter that he wants to. Let's just be real, and he can get in the ring, with any one of those B to C grade level fighters. And you put him on the top 10, the top 5 pound for pound list by facing guys that have never been champions and possibly never will be champions because they're not A-grade level caliber competition, no problem. Then don't get pissed off when ESPN ranks Naoya Inoue as fighter of the year because you're pissed off and you have your panties in a bunch because Crawford got the biggest win of the year. No problem. Keep that same energy then. No problem whatsoever. Stop bitching and moaning when Canelo Alvarez fights a John Ryder or overall that of a Rocky Fielding instead of that of David Benavidez or someone that you would prefer to see him in the ring with. Stop bitching about it. Don't complain when Tyson Fury gets in the ring with that of Francis Ngannou instead of that of Alexander Usyk or Anthony Joshua. Don't complain about it. If you're going to state those standards and then on top of that claim that he deserves to be top 5 to top 10 pound for pound, no problem. Keep those same exact standards with Canelo Alvarez. Keep those same exact standards with that of Usyk. Keep those same standards with Fury. Keep those same standards with Inoue. Keep the same standards all around. Okay?
I don't even want to think about it. It was
Gervonta Davis, his trainer, is fresh out. And Gervonta Davis's trainer says, why would I do that? We got a list too. He talks about fighting Shakur Stevenson. He's not sure that that's the type of fight that he wants for Tank, and he explains why. Now I'm going to give you guys my thoughts on what.
Basically, what it translates to is that Shakur Stevenson is way too dangerous, and on top of that, the fight is just not big enough right now in terms of a money fight, and it would possibly ruin our image if he were to look super bad with Shakur Stevenson coming off of that type of performance. Or on top of that, with him potentially losing to Shakur Stevenson, we need to build that fight up a little bit more. And that's why, certain fighters, and Shakur Stevenson is a black American fighter. So he's actually going to have a great amount of following, especially from that overall of the black fans, or just a certain amount of American fans in general, whether they like him or whether they hate him. At the end of the day, Shakur Stevenson is going to get a great amount of following, especially because he's had a great amount of hype behind him now for years, and he's an Olympian and all this other stuff. But that's why, when it comes to certain fighters, especially like that of the Cubans, like Guillermo Rigondeaux or that of Araceli Lara, it's so hard for them to get certain fights because they don't have the most crowd-pleasing style all the time, and then on top of that, they don't really have the following of the black American crowd. They do at times, but not really the same following as what a Shakur Stevenson or what a Gervonta Tank Davis would have. And then on top of that, they don't speak English. So it's just very hard sometimes for the Cubans over to get that. And also, it's kind of very similar for that as certain European fighters. They try to, promote them and hype them up as well, in certain times. But for example, like Usyk and that of Vasily Lomachenko, even with the stars that they are, they're not as big of a star as, say, what a Tyson Fury is, or something like that, or other fighters. It's a little bit hard, especially when promoting that of certain foreign fighters, especially when they're not English speaking.
Said, make sure you guys subscribe. What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. A new clip from Calvin Ford, fresh out. Calvin Ford has done probably the first interview. I haven't really seen many interviews from him, but he just did an interview with Marco Boxing. And in this interview, he gives his side to what he saw in the Shakur Stevenson fight. You guys heard a snippet at the beginning. And what he's saying is after Shakur's last performance versus Edwin De Los Santos, he says, I don't even want to consider that fight. Like, you got to listen to what he said. He said, I don't really even have nothing to say. I don't really want to even consider that fight because it was a bad night for boxing. Meaning Shakur Stevenson, a lot of people said this. They felt Shakur stunk up the joint. His fight with Edwin De Los Santos, it left a lot more to be desired. So
it definitely did. And I like Shakur Stevenson as a fighter. In fact, I love Shakur Stevenson as a fighter. I think that he's a tremendous fighter. But he was terrible in that fight. And I think that maybe he was kind of taking more of a conservative approach and, kind of a little bit more timid in that fight, maybe because, he said, what, this dude is not worth taking some of these risks for. And then he has one-shot knockout power. He has a lot of power. I can feel it. And if he hits me correctly, he can knock me on my ass. And this dude, he's a little bit too powerful, and he's a little bit too dangerous for me to go all out in certain areas. So I'm going to kind of take a safer route. I don't always mind that, but I think that Shakur Stevenson in that fight, just in my personal view, I don't think that he looked good at all. I thought that he looked like a very poor version of himself. I thought that, to be honest with you, he looked very limited in that fight.
With that being said, he wasn't really fond of the fight. It was pretty apparent. But he's telling you the reason why. He's saying based on Shakur's performance versus Edwin De Los Santos. And I don't really see anything wrong with that. My thing is this.
Well, here's also the problem. I don't really have a problem with those standards as well. But the reason why I also like to review the LDBC and the media videos is because if this was Canelo Alvarez talking about Demetrius Bubu Andrade or someone like that, we all know what the narratives would be. That he's ducking black fighters and all this sort of stuff. So how come with Gervonta Tank Davis and his team, it's just perfectly okay to let him off the hook? And I get the perspective. I'm not necessarily saying that, Gervonta Tank Davis or Calvin Ford, that maybe they shouldn't build up the fight a little bit more. But at least, if you wanted, like, for example, if you wanted to criticize Canelo for not fighting Jamal Charlo and Andrade, like, at least you could say that he fought still plenty of other 8th grade level names. like Lara, Trout, Golovkin, Saunders, and Smith, and Caleb Plant and some of those other guys. Like, he fought plenty of fighters that probably would have been around the same level, if not even above that of a Jamal Charlo at the very least, if not even a Demetrius Bubo Andrade. It's like, it's no offense against Gervonta Tank Davis, but at the end of the day, I believe he turns 30 years old this year. If I'm wrong about that, somebody correct me. But at the end of the day, it's like, dude, who have you fought? It's like, there's no Teofimo Lopez there. There's no Vasily Lomachenko there. There's no Shakur Stevenson there. There's no Devin Haney there. There's no Josh Taylor there. There's no Regis Prograis there. There's no one there. And I know that a certain amount of Gervonta Tank Davis fans, they'll say all this shit about Mario Barrios and all these other guys. Those guys are not A to B grade. They're not A grade level fighters. They're B to C grade level fighters. It just is what it is. How many of the fighters that Gervonta Tank Davis has recently been in the ring with, do you believe beat any of those fighters that I just recently named? The true level A grade level fighters? Oh, pretty much none of them. It just is what it is.
Boxing is, was, and probably forever will be a what have you done for me lately type of sport. What do I mean? So, for example,
every sport is what have you done for me lately? Because you're always having to compete, and at the end of the day, your replacement could always be just around the corner.
Errol Spence, in my opinion, he did it the hard way. He collected 3 belts, and he did it one by one. Crawford, I get it. Crawford beat him. Errol doesn't even dispute that. But it does not change the path and the trajectory from Errol Spence in fighting bigger fights with Mikey Garcia, 50,000, fighting unifications, Sean Porter, fighting a unification with your Dennis Ugas, who had just beat the great Manny Pacquiao. I believe it's up to my promoter. Right? This is Errol Spence's path. This is the path that he went to get those belts. But you see, one fateful night last year, he just fought Terrence Crawford, who's a bad dude. Terrence Crawford beat him, dropped him.
Yes, and you've been making excuses ever since. And once again, who knows? Who knows overall what could have been wrong or not wrong with Errol Spence? I'm just stating this. Do I believe that he had, his eye compromised to the point to where, he was getting his ass kicked that bad to the point to where he couldn't see punches incoming? Absolutely not.
3 times and beat him convincingly. Now you have people saying that Errol Spence needs to retire. Errol Spence ain't...
And he very well might have to retire. Because what is Errol Spence Jr.? I mean, what fights are really available for him right now? I mean, he could go up to 154. I'm not saying that he has to retire. But I definitely wouldn't take the rematch with Terrence Bud Crawford, at least not at this current moment in time.
Yes, and Errol was overrated. So...
Well, here's my thing overall about you, Mr. Boxing Ego. You love to always give the flowers to certain fighters. And let's be real, Black American and PBC fighters that, let's be real, you love to gush over, and you love to jerk off in the corner over when it comes down to it, like Deontay Wilder and Gervonta Tank Davis and Errol Spence Jr. And you love to talk all this stuff about, people are, hating on them and, they're, it's a what have you done for me lately? Like all these LDBC and new media channels or just fans in general. They always want you to have sympathy for their favorite fighters when they end up losing. But then when it comes to other fighters, they don't mind basically throwing tomatoes at them on stage. They don't mind humiliating them or kicking them while they're down. Boxing Ego and Dante's Boxing Nation, for example, those were 2 of the channels that always kicked Anthony Joshua while he was down when he ended up losing a fight. But then as soon as Deontay Wilder ends up losing a fight against Fury and that against Joseph Parker, then they want you to have sympathy. Then they want to say, oh, well, the man is still great and all sort of stuff. Keep the same energy.
That if you need it, and I'm not saying I agree to these things. I'm just telling you the nature of the beast, and that's the sport of boxing. Boxing is a what have you done for me lately sport. So it's not surprising that Shakur Stevenson is being judged harshly on his last performance by many. Now, I don't think Shakur is a bad fighter. I think he's a terrific fighter, and he's definitely dangerous. But you got to understand the point of view from Calvin Ford. He's basically saying that particular fight left a lot more to be desired. Why? if that's how you
What Calvin Ford is saying is that Shakur Stevenson is way too dangerous for us to fight him coming off of that level of performance, and that he's way too tricky overall for us to fight him when the fight is not built up enough yet. And on top of that, we don't believe overall that it would be the smartest thing to fight him right now. And it's kind of the same thing where Gennady Golovkin was coming from, with that of Lara, and also Canelo Alvarez with Demetrius Bubu Andrade. To fight some of those fighters, whether people like it or not, you have to stick out in some sort of way. And Shakur Stevenson does stick out. But Gervonta Davis and Calvin Ford also realize that Shakur Stevenson is a major threat. So if Shakur Stevenson and Gervonta Davis, if it's going to happen, it's going to be worth both of their times.
you're going to fight, he said, do the fans pay for that? Who's going to want to see that? And I don't know about exactly how.
Well, why don't you guys make the same excuses overall that you guys make with Canelo and Gennady Golovkin and some of these other fighters? Like, hey, Canelo, you'll fight John Ryder, but you're not going to fight Jamal Charlo or David Benavidez. And to a degree, that is a very valid point, to a degree. Depending on who Canelo Alvarez is fighting. But how come there's never any Gervonta Davis? You're fighting these guys like Mario Barrios and Isaac Pitbull Cruz. Who are you fighting over? Who are you going to fight next that's more popular than Shakur Stevenson? Remember all these points from Dante's Boxing Nation and Boxing Ego, once again, where they're completely ignorant to that of the business side of boxing. But then when it comes to Gervonta Davis not fighting elite black fighters or just elite fighters in general, then all of a sudden they're business aficionados.
Calvin articulated it because he didn't really elaborate. I think he should elaborate because now a lot of people running around saying, oh, no, ego. Tank don't want to fight nobody.
Well, who is he really fighting, Mr. Boxing Ego? Who is he really fighting? And do you have these same standards for Canelo Alvarez? You have these same standards for Tyson Fury. You have the same standards for other fighters when their corner or when someone overall says something similar. Like when Canelo Alvarez said, not too long ago that he doesn't want to fight that of Mexican fighters. Now, in my personal view, Canelo just meant, I think, that he wanted to respect that of other Mexican fighters and let them build their brand, at least until later on, until he saw a fight that maybe was worthy. But of course, what did Boxing Ego and a lot of those guys, other guys, try to turn it into? That, he's avoiding David Benavidez and he's avoiding some of these other fighters and he's avoiding elite level competition. Right, so then how come you're not having the same energy with Gervonta Davis? And that's not me saying that I think that Gervonta Davis and Calvin Ford, once again, are not doing the correct thing by, letting this fight marinate a little bit more. But at the end of the day, it's like, at least with Canelo, like, whatever you want to say about Canelo was always fighting an A-grade level fighter at least once every other year. It's like, who the fuck has Gervonta Davis really fought? I mean, he just recently fought Ryan Garcia. I can't get after him too much for that, even though I'm not really quite sure if Ryan Garcia is an A-grade level fighter. I'll give him A-, I suppose. But at the end of the day, where is Teofimo Lopez? Where's Josh Taylor? Where's Regis Prograis? Where's Ivan Lomachenko? Where are some of these other fighters? It's like he's not fighting any A-grade level names, and yet to this day, at least I never see it. I rarely see, at least from new media, him getting any type of actual criticism. Now, maybe from the LDBC channels, he's getting a little bit more, but I would have to check it out.
Oh, ego. Tank is afraid of Shakur, and they're like bending and twisting his words to like and not really putting no context behind it. But me personally, somebody with a brain, I understand what he's saying.
Barely a brain.
Based on that, like, you guys let me know in the comment section. Based on Shakur's last fight, which is his most recent fight,
when one of us comes up short, we all come up short.
There's no fate in team.
Never leave your wife in bed without reaching the final moments again. This is capable of making your member hard.
is Tank Davis and Shakur a mega fight? Because I'll give you another example. Because some people, anything...
Right, but you can make that case once again with a lot of fighters. Canelo Alvarez versus Demetrius Bubu Andrade, it also was not a mega fight. But at the end of the day, Shakur Stevenson, you know, at the end of the day, he has a belt there. And he still would be worth more money for Gervonta Tank Davis than plenty of other fighters. So once again, I'm not disagreeing completely with what Mr. Boxing Ego is stating here. I also think that the fight probably has to marinate a little bit more. But at the end of the day, where are these same standards for Canelo Alvarez, Tyson Fury, and let's be real, any non-black fighter that they always love to rake over the coals? Where are these same standards for Canelo Alvarez?
When it comes to Tank, they're super biased, right? Because Tank's the face of boxing.
As are you. And right now, I would still have to say that Canelo Alvarez probably is the main face of boxing. But we all know that the LDBC and new media, that they're going to keep acclaiming that Gervonta Tank Davis is the face of boxing, even though he's only done one pay-per-view, over 1 million pay-per-view buys. And don't get me wrong, those are great numbers. And Gervonta Tank Davis does great with his events, but I can't call him the face of boxing quite as of yet when he's only ever done one pay-per-view that's been above 250,000. It just is what it is.
So I'll remove the thought of Tank.
And Ryan Garcia also was a big part of that pay-per-view. Okay? So it's not just Gervonta Tank Davis. Keep in mind that Canelo Alvarez sometimes has fought fighters like Caleb Plant who have never been on a pay-per-view and done about 900,000 pay-per-view buys. Gervonta Tank Davis without Ryan Garcia has never done he's never done 300,000 pay-per-view buys. You know, and you know, new media can tell you this bullshit about overall, like, oh, well, you know, you saying that Ryan Garcia overall would do over 1 million pay-per-view buys by himself. No one is saying that, but you know, that's the stupid games that a lot of these idiots try to play. The point is that Ryan Garcia has about 11 to 12 million followers on Instagram. If you take a look at Ryan Garcia's face, even certain friends of mine that are not boxing fans whatsoever, they know who Ryan Garcia is. So that's the main reason why that fight was so big, because Gervonta Tank Davis and Ryan Garcia, they were both overall very big stars in boxing. And on top of that, when it came down to it, that fight had been building for several years. So that's why, once again, I cannot claim that Gervonta Tank Davis is the face of boxing as of yet, just because he did the greatest pay-per-view of last year and just because it's only been one event. Because what if his next event only does 250,000 and 300,000 pay-per-view buys? You know, I mean, does that still make him the face of boxing? I have to see this continue.
For an example.
And of course, I'm not expecting 1 million pay-per-view buys each and every event. But for me to claim that Gervonta Tank Davis right now is the face of boxing, what I would have to say, or what I would have to see, is that I would have to see 400,000 pay-per-view buys or above for each and every pay-per-view. And if he is the true face of boxing, that really shouldn't be that hard of a sell.
If you will. I'll use Deontay the Bronze Bomber Wilder. They put Wilder versus Joseph Parker. He accepted the fight on a Saudi card. Anthony Joshua was fighting on the same card as the main event versus Otto Wallin. The deal was that Wilder versus Joshua would be next, contingent on both fighters winning their bouts. That's it. That's what needed to happen. They both needed...
Yes, and Wilder failed miserably
to win their bouts. Deontay the Bronze Bomber Wilder, unfortunately, he lost to Joseph Parker, and many people thought he lost bad, like he lost several.
Would it be unfortunate? Would it be unfortunate had AJ Anthony Joshua lost his fight, but Deontay Wilder had knocked Joseph Parker out within 5 to 6 rounds? Had it been vice versa, would Boxing Ego really be saying that it's, you know, super heavily unfortunate? I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm sure that to a degree he says that because I think that a lot of people really want to see the AJ Anthony Joshua versus Deontay the Bronze Bomber Wilder fight. But would it really be the same? Like Boxing Ego and a lot of these LDBC boys, you know, they're now crying, you know, saying that old people are criticizing Deontay Wilder. Once again, Deontay Wilder, if he's getting any, I'm not even going to say unnecessary, if he's getting overall any batterment, you know, overall from that of social media or overall that of certain boxing fans, you know, that pretty much is all, you know, his fault. It is what it is. Not just from the excuses and the bullshit that he made up about the Tyson Fury stuff, which he never even believed in the first place when it came down to, but he let his mind get infected by a lot of these idiots and these pro-black cult members from the LDBC and the media. And then on top of that, you know, when it came down to it, when Anthony Joshua had lost, he tried to run his name through the mud. And he tried to say that he was a fraud and that he was a pussy and all this other stuff. But then Deontay Wilder ends up losing a fight and he is looked at overall in possibly a fraudulent position. And now we're supposed to have sympathy for him according to the LDBC and new media. That's not how life works. You know, whatever energy you put out is eventually what you're going to get back.
Rounds. So with that being said, it knocked the steam out of the Joshua fight. So now we're not getting it.
Of course it did. Joseph Parker was a dude that got knocked out about a year and a half ago. And on top of that, he had lost every big fight overall pretty much within his boxing career. And he had been knocked out just a year ago. And Deontay Wilder, I'm not even sure if he won a single round in that fight.
At least next, because who is Joshua? It's already been announced. They've already done a press conference. He decided to then, whether you say, oh, Joshua ducked him, or, you know, Joshua really didn't want
And
nothing.
let me give Boxing Ego credit to this, because he at least did say that he does not have a problem with the AJ Anthony Joshua versus Francis Ngannou fight. Let me at least give him that certain amount of credit.
Well, Wilder, you can say that, but at the end of the day, it truly was up on Wilder to clear his hurdle to get to the Joshua bag.
Yes, it was.
And he didn't do that with Joseph Parker. So as a result, that's what we're stuck with. You know what I mean? Now Joshua moves on and advances. So I agree with what Calvin Ford is saying, to be honest, because that's the nature of the sport of boxing. If you do not like that, then you have to continue to do what Floyd Mayweather and Andre Ward and other fighters did, and then you never have to worry about it. Like your stock, if you keep putting on dazzling performances and keep figuring out your opponents and stuff like that, then your stock doesn't drop, even in a victory. Because I've seen fighters who lose a fight and their stock is almost higher than the person that won, because we know boxing has politics. We know that boxing...
Right, so here's the question then, Mr. Boxing Ego. Did you have the same energy, and did a certain amount of the new media and LDBC members, did they have the same energy with Canelo Alvarez and Demetrius Bubu Andrade? Did they have the same energy when it came to that, you know, of Arisani Lara when he was wanting to fight Gennady Golovkin? You know, and Andrade and Lara, both very talented defensive fighters especially. But at the end of the day, what performance did you ever take a look at during their career and say, oh my God, you know, Lara overall needs, you know, that Lara Golovkin fight needs to happen fucking pronto. Like, it just never happened. Lara actually, and you know, I love Lara. Lara actually was one of my favorite fighters of the 2010s. I thought that he was a defensive master, having his flaws of, you know, of course, you know, in certain areas, but at the end of the day, still a very slick boxer, and in my view, one of the greater boxers of that generation. But when it came down to it, you know, Lara unfortunately just didn't have the crowd-pleasing enough style, and on top of that, he just didn't have the marketability. So that's a big part of the reason why Golovkin did not fight him. On top of that, because of the threat that he was too much of a threat for the reward that he brought. And it was the same thing for Canelo Alvarez and Demetrius Bubu Andrade. So once again, you know, they have no problem criticizing fighters like a Fury or a Golovkin or a Canelo Alvarez and throwing their names under the bus. But then when it comes to Gervonta Tank Davis, they protect him.
Sometimes.
And once again, I don't disagree with what Calvin Ford is necessarily stating, but it's just interesting that I don't see Gervonta Tank Davis really getting any criticism whatsoever from any of these new media or LDBC channels. Now, there was a commentator that told me that the LDBC channels, that they criticize Gervonta Tank Davis's resume a little bit more, or that they criticize it often. I would have to see that with my own two eyes, because from what I've seen, you know, when it comes down to it, and I tend to review new media a little bit more, but from what I've seen, even of the LDBC channels, it appears that they protect him just as much as new media. But if I'm wrong, then I'm wrong about that. But I would have to see certain videos.
They say a guy won, but everybody who watched the fight, no one agrees to it that that person truly won. So that's basically what Calvin Ford is saying, in my interpretation. He's saying that...
Well, I don't think he's saying that Shakur Stevenson, that overall that Shakur Stevenson lost that fight or anything like that, if that's what you're implying. I think that all he's implying is that if Shakur Stevenson wants to fight us, he's going to have to make himself, you know, overall enough of a name. And Shakur is a great name out there in boxing. He clearly is one of the bigger names. But kind of like Canelo and David Benavidez, the way that Canelo looks at David Benavidez is like, listen, dude, if you're going to fight me, you're going to have to overall earn that road there. Not just in terms of beating certain opponents, but on top of that, you know, in terms of earning money from me. Because when I fight you, you know, you're going to have your career upped whether I win or whether I lose, you know, when it comes out, or whether you win or whether you lose, you know. So at the end of the day, you have to make it worth it for me. And I think that Gervonta Tank Davis and Calvin Ford, they take a look at it very similarly with that of Shakur Stevenson. But that's why right now Gervonta Tank Davis, and it's no offense against them, I think that he's a terrific fighter. I can't have him on my top 10 pound for pound list. And that's not me necessarily stating that he's avoiding every single fight out there. But at the end of the day, it's like, dude, like, who the fuck are you facing? It's like, I mean, he doesn't even have a George Kambosos on his resume. Someone overall that at least beat a Teofimo Lopez. It's like, who the hell is on there?
Why would we want to fight Shakur Stevenson? Look at his last outing. You know, he was evasive, and that's what most people are saying. Now people, again, the spin doctors, the usual suspects in old media, they're coming in and try to reframe this and, you know, pin the tail on the donkey and suggest like, oh, Tank's ducking Shakur Stevenson. But it's really up to Shakur Stevenson or whatever the opponent to keep your stock high. Like, for example,
Right, so then how come those same standards are not up with that of Demetrius Bulbo Andrade? So that means that that excuse also has to be applied, or overall, whether you think it's a valid or whether you think it's an invalid excuse, if you're trying to keep the same standards, what that means is that you can never complain about Canelo Alvarez not fighting Demetrius Bulbo Andrade again. Because whether people want to admit it or not, is Demetrius Andrade, has he really ever had a super high stock within that of boxing? The answer is no. It just is what it is. You know, so people can bitch, moan, and complain about that all they want to, but at the end of the day, I agree a little bit with Mr. Boxing Ego, but then you have to keep that same energy with other fighters as well. But he seems to want to keep it with fighters that he's clearly trying to protect or that he's a fan of, and then other fighters that he's clearly trying to tear down because he doesn't want to see them at the number one pound per pound spot or that high in the pound per pound list, like Canelo Alvarez or a Fury or someone like that. Then all of a sudden it's a duck, then all of a sudden it's a cherry pick.
Devin just destroyed Regis Prograis. I was there. Regis previously said he wanted to fight Tank Davis. Nobody's really asking for that fight because of how Regis looked in his last fight. Now, I get it. Shakur Stevenson did not lose, but it doesn't matter if you win or lose. It's your performance. And from Edwin De Los Santos and Shakur Stevenson, I think more was desired from that fight. I
definitely would agree, and I can't disagree with what Boxing Ego is stating here. And Shakur Stevenson, you know, to a certain degree, and I understand he has the skills to pay the bills at his best. And you know, I know a lot of people will take a look at it and say, "Oh, well, Gervonta, you know, he needs to fight Shakur." Well, Gervonta, whether he fights Shakur or not next, he needs to just fight somebody in general. I mean, like, it's no offense, but I'm tired of these little B to C grade level Dominican and fucking Mexican guys that clearly are not going to have a chance against you. Like, I don't really give a shit about seeing Isaac Pitbull Cruz and Rolly Romero and William Zepeda. Like, I don't give a fuck about these guys that are stiff as a board and on top of that clearly don't have A grade level talent. It just is what it is. You know, so Gervonta Tank Davis is kind of, you know, spoon feeding, you know, some of these fights to that of the public. And don't get me wrong, he has a great fan base. He's a very entertaining fighter, and he's putting on a lot of entertaining events. But it's about time that Gervonta Tank Davis finally gets in the ring with someone that's A grade. And let me also state this, because a lot of new media, especially, you know, or the LDBC, they love to spoon feed you this bullshit about how I can never put Canelo, you know, above guys like Marco Antonio Barrera and Eric Morales because he did things his own way and, you know, he was a maneuver. Well, right. So that means that Gervonta Tank Davis, that means that we can never compare him to Floyd Mayweather Jr. and that we can never compare him to Sugar Ray Robinson or Terrence Crawford. That means that we can never compare him to those fighters because Gervonta Tank Davis is doing something similar, you know, to what Canelo Alvarez did with certain fighters. But the difference is that Canelo at least fought great competition during his career. He just didn't fight certain names that he thought overall were viable for the moment, you know. But it's like with Gervonta Tank Davis, it's like, who the fuck are you fighting?
You guys that I thought it was going to be a cracking,
you know. But once again, it's just very interesting how they always love to tell you these standards, and they say they love to bitch, moan, and complain about double standards all the time when it comes to fighters. But they just apply a lot of old media tactics and double standards and racism, you know, to that of non-black fighters. Once again, all new media and the LDBCR, they're just old media. They're just a pro-black cult version. While old media, you know, they kind of have their racial motivations and racist in some sort of ways against that of black fighters. New media and new media and the LDBC, they're just like old media. It's just that they're a pro-black cult, where the, you know, ESPN, sometimes they try to degrade, you know, that of black fighters, at least at certain times, if you want to argue that. But I believe personally that the LDBC and new media, they're probably even worse with their racial antics.
Right, and it really wasn't. So I think that's all.
Because once again, these standards, oh, Canelo can't be above Barrera or Eric Morales, even though Morales and Barrera pretty much were never thought of ever, even in a debate, as the number one pound for pound fighter for their time, and lost way too many big fights in their career, you know. But Canelo has won the majority of his fights. He's a 4-weight division champion, unified in a weight division, and he can't even be in those guys' class. That makes no fucking sense whatsoever. And Tyson Fury, you know, he can't be in the same class as Muhammad Ali and some of these other guys because he gets knocked down too much and all this other stuff. All this other stupid bullshit, even though he's undefeated and he's won every single belt there and he's beaten at least a few A-grade names, one top 5 pound-for-pound fighter at one point in time and one top 20 pound-for-pound fighter at one point in time. Dominated both of those guys in Klitschko and Deontay Wilder and Dillian White. But yet, he can't be one of the greater heavyweights of all time. You know, but Terrence Crawford, you know, gets, you know, about 2 to 3 A-grade wins in his career, and he's up there with Floyd Mayweather Jr. Like, come on.
Calvin Ford is saying, you know what I mean? Why would I do that? Why would I put my fighter in there with somebody who's basically not coming to fight? And you have to understand, and I'm not saying Shakur's not coming to fight, so maybe I shouldn't have said it like that. But basically somebody who is going to almost like play keep away, and they could fight negative. You know what I mean? They could fight negative, and the onus is on Tank Davis, who's the big puncher. The onus is on Tank Davis, who's the bigger star, to create these spectacular knockouts. So you got to understand. I understand exactly where he's coming from. You know, you look at fights like, for example, we're seeing Tank Davis now receive Floyd Mayweather type of hate. We're truly seeing.
Right, and it was the same thing with Canelo Alvarez. You know why that is? Because they realize that not only are they big stars, but also that, you know, they are a big threat in terms of the pound-for-pound spot. You know, just like you hate on Canelo Alvarez on a daily basis.
This right before our eyes. This generation's Floyd Mayweather. I'm not saying they fight alike. I'm saying the level of hate that he's receiving. We're starting to see the same type of hate that Gervonta Davis is receiving.
But is Gervonta Tank Davis really receiving a lot of hate, or are people just getting tired of this bullshit where he's fighting these B to C grade level fighters? And, you know, and certain people would argue the same thing with Canelo, but, you know, the thing is about Canelo is that at least when you talk about the Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant fight, people can say all they want to, but people knew that those guys are A-grade level fighters. They knew overall that those guys were, at least at one point in time, looked at as very decent contenders for their weight classes. Caleb Plant, you know, overall was a fighter that was looked at as one of the top, if not the top 168-pounder at one point in time. And Canelo fought him, and they still weren't happy. But then he fights David Benavidez right afterwards, and it's one of the biggest fights in boxing. Billy Joe Saunders is about to fight Demetrius Bubo Andrade, and it's one of the biggest fights in boxing. Then he fights Canelo Alvarez a couple years later, and it's a cherry pick, and he has no power. So once again, you know, that's how you know that, you know, a fighter, you know, truly has a lot of acclaim in that of boxing, that they have a lot of power, you know, not just completely by the amount of people that like you, but also the amount of people that try to be tearing you down.
That's some of the hate that Floyd got. You know, the writers, none of the writers liked Floyd. They would always pen negative articles, say the Berto fight was a failure. You're seeing the same thing happen with Tank Davis. Oh, he doesn't do those numbers without Ryan Garcia. He only can sell 200K.
Right, but he doesn't do those numbers without that of Ryan Garcia. Is that a hateful thing to say, or is that just the truth? Is that just the truth? Now, had Gervonta Tank Davis, you know, been doing better numbers, then okay. You know, but at the end of the day, once again, that's why I can't acclaim that Gervonta Tank Davis is the face of boxing yet. Is that really something that's truly hateful to say, or would something hateful to say be like Gervonta Tank Davis wasn't the reason why they did 1 million pay-per-view buys? Ryan Garcia was the bigger star, you know, and Gervonta Tank Davis is weak sauce. That might be something that would be considered hating. But to say that Gervonta Tank Davis isn't doing over 1 million pay-per-view buys without Ryan Garcia, that's not really something that is hating. That's factual, because he's never done anything close to those numbers without that Ryan Garcia.
LeBron's at his fights. Madonna's at his fights. All the celebs are at his fights. Tank is the face of boxing.
Right, but how many celebrities are also at Canelo Alvarez's fights? Does that mean overall that, you know, once again, that that Canelo is the secured face of boxing? I mean, just because you have a multitude of celebrities at your fights, that doesn't mean overall that you're the face of boxing. You know, Canelo Alvarez pretty much is every celebrity that comes out at his fights too. So we can make that argument once again. It's all about the consistent amount of numbers that you get.
Not going to beat around the bush with it. I'm not even going to debate it or argue it. He's the face of boxing.
Well, right now, once again, Canelo Alvarez is the face of boxing in my view. I think that Gervonta Tank Davis probably is in a very close second place. But I can't just off of one event say that Gervonta Tank Davis. I can't say just based off of one event when he's never done anything over 250,000 pay-per-view buys previously, I can't say that he's the main face of boxing when he just doesn't have those numbers, at least in a consistent manner. But we all know why the LDBC and new media, we all know why they're trying to say that he's the face of boxing. But they even when Canelo clearly was the main face of boxing, they kept trying to tear him down, not even just as a fighter, but they always tried to say that he was never the face of boxing in the first place. So they just have their panties in a twist about Canelo.
Look at YouTube. YouTube, everybody making videos about Tank. Whether they're saying good stuff or bad stuff, they talking about Tank. Nobody's doing
right. Well, if we're also going to go there, you probably talk about Canelo Alvarez more than any other fighter. So then what does that say?
that with any other person. Teofimo got an actual fight that is in February, a few weeks away. Nobody's even really truly talking about it. And it's a good fight. I like the fight.
Right, but Teofimo Lopez has never been in the discussion. He's never been in the discussion overall as the face of boxing. When you talk about the face of boxing, there's only going to be about 2 to 3 names that pop up right now. You're going to have Canelo, you're going to have Gervonta Davis, and, you might have someone like Tyson Fury, AJ Anthony Joshua, someone like that, a little bit later. I'd probably say Fury right now because of some of the numbers that he does. Of course, his last fight didn't do very well, but Fury, at usual times does pretty good numbers.
Jermaine Ortiz, but the reality is more people are talking about Tank, and we don't even know who he's going to fight than people who actually have fights, right? And the people who are Tank's ops, their names come up in relationship to Tank. So it just proves my point.
Yes, very much, just like that of Canelo Alvarez. Now, what that means is that Gervonta Davis, that he is one of the faces of boxing, but I don't know if he is the face of boxing. I would still say right now that it's probably Canelo Alvarez, because I still think that Canelo probably is the most talked about fighter, even by these channels. Now, I will say this, it is slipping a little bit, but that David Benavidez fight, if Canelo, of course, can win that fight, that definitely would probably reoccur him as that, but I'm not quite sure if that's a 100% certain that Canelo's going to win that fight. That's not me saying that in my view that Canelo is not the more skilled fighter of the two, but you can tell that he's wearing down a little bit. He's clearly going to be older when it comes down to it. And he's been fighting professionally for about 18 years.
And it proves it crystal clearly. You know what I mean? So I understand what Calvin Ford is saying. I understand that Tank gets the hate, so people are going to spin it and say, oh, Tank's afraid of Shakur Stevenson. The other thing is, how come there's no pressure for Shakur Stevenson or a said fighter to become a free agent, which some of these guys are doing, and go work with Al Heyman and PBC? If you truly want to...
Once again, you should have kept these same standards of that of Mr. Demetrius Bubu Andrade. Where were these same standards for that of Demetrius Bubu Andrade when it came to the conversations about Canelo versus Demetrius Bubu Andrade? Where were these same conversations? That Andrade, you need to work with the PBC. That way you could potentially fight that of Jamal Charlo and some of these other fighters and David Benavidez. No, it was all that Canelo was avoiding that of Demetrius Bubu Andrade. But then you want to go with Gervonta Davis and claim all of a sudden be the business aficionado.
Forced to fight and you become a free agent, you enter a free agency, it seems like that would be a step in the right direction to try to make your dreams a reality. But I'm the only one that seems to talk about this. Like, for example, Devin Haney, there's moments of his career recently where he's been a free agent. Why not, if you could work with Eddie Hearn, if you could work with Bob Arum and do multi-fight deals or one-offs or two-offs or three-fight deals with Top Rank, why not do a one-off, two-off, three-fight deal with Bob Arum? Same thing with Shakur Stevenson. He says he becomes a free agent. Can't wait to see what his next move is. Because if his next move is not PBC, then it seems to me, if you're a crackhead, you would want to go to a crack house to re-up on some product. That's how that works. So if you're a free agent and you want to fight Tank so bad, I would make the push to see what PBC is talking about. And they're already putting on the...
That wouldn't be the worst idea in the world, and I can't completely disagree with that of Boxing Ego. I also had a very similar energy to that of Demetrius Bubu Andrade, or opinion anyway, with that of Andrade and also that of Terrence Boyd Crawford and some other fighters. At times you will have to go to the promotion that either seems the most hot, or at least at the time, or at least has the fighter that you want to fight.
Biggest fights in boxing. That's a separate video though. Subscribe. So I didn't take it like, oh, Tank's afraid of Shakur.
Well, of course not, but let's also be real, Mr. Boxing Eagle. You're going to protect Mr. Tanky Boy, basically, at any given cost that you're going to. It is what it is.
And, you know, the two sparred.
Once again, this is the same guy that when it came to Canelo Alvarez, he always loves to shit all over his pay-per-view numbers. But then when it came to Gervonta Tank Davis and the pay-per-view numbers not being revealed against Isaac Pitbull Cruz because it completely bombed because no one wanted to see that shit-ass fight, then he said, why are you guys pocket watching? Why are you guys worrying about another man's money? This is the same guy.
The two know each other. Shakur fought negative in his last fight. That's what he's being judged of. That's his last performance, and it wasn't a great one. Like, for example, Tank is in the he's transcending just boxing. You're seeing him on blogs. Oh, Tank bought the block up. You're seeing him enter this new domain where like people outside of the realm, like Vlad TV and Willie D Live or whoever, Shade Room. These people are picking up Tank and posting about Tank. They don't cover boxing exclusively by any means. So that's what I'm talking about. Tank.
Absolutely. Gervonta Tank Davis definitely is one of the faces of boxing, and he very well might be the undisputed face of boxing very soon, especially if Canelo Alvarez 100% falls off that mountaintop or falls off that throne. Right now, once again, I would still have to say that Canelo, in my view at least, holds that mountaintop, or at least he holds that throne, at least for the face of boxing. But Gervonta Tank Davis is getting very close. He, of course, is very popular, no doubt about it. He is being talked about, pretty much at all times.
Is in another league when it comes to that. If he's trying to put on the biggest events based on Shakur's last performance, I really doubt that would be the biggest fight. Now, boxing heads would leave you to believe that would be a mega event, and then they'll lie and say, oh, everyone wants to see it, and then they'll illegally stream the fight. That's how that works. So I don't even know.
Right, but Mr. Boxing Ego, even with the biggest fights, even with the Ryan Garcia and Gervonta Tank Davis fight, people still illegally stream that. Just because people try to illegally stream it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to be a big fight. I don't really know overall what that point overall has to do much with anything. I mean, of course, he's trying to allege that, some people with certain fights, they know they have to buy it and all sort of stuff. But, I mean, at the end of the day, people are going to be doing that anyways. I understand what he's trying to say, but Shakur Stevenson versus Gervonta Tank Davis would be a very big fight. And can you name me another fight that would be much larger than the Shakur Stevenson fight? I mean, there would be other fights that are bigger. The problem is that once again, these standards, once again, that they had for Canelo Alvarez, about, oh, well, he needs to fight this guy and this guy because it'd be bigger than the guys that he's facing. No problem with that. But then why are these same standards not being placed for Gervonta Tank Davis? But yet you're criticizing other fighters for doing something very similar to Gervonta Tank Davis. That's how you know, once again, that they have a racial motivation.
If Shakur's brand is where it probably should be to help catapult that fight. Plus, you factor in what Calvin Ford said, Shakur's style, I really don't know. And I understand you have, as a fighter, you have to figure out styles. But again, there's a simple solution here. Continue to build your brand and put on scintillating performances, and then you keep knocking down those doors. So I don't think Shakur is impossible for him to get the Tank fight, but I don't think you're going to open.
Well, Gervonta Tank Davis is going to have to face Shakur Stevenson eventually because, at least with Canelo and Demetrius Bubo Andrade, like Canelo Alvarez, like he knew that Andrade, that he just had no following whatsoever. Even, the Black American fan base, I mean, they were a fan of him, but it's like not even a lot of those guys were talking about Demetrius Bubo Andrade. And I think that Canelo Alvarez somewhat knew that. I think that at one point in time there was, one time they were possibly talking about getting that fight made. But I think that Canelo always took a look at Bubo Andrade and said, you just have no following. Like, you just have nothing, dude. And then on top of that, you've never fought anybody. What's the reason for me to fight you?
In the floodgates of those conversations, performing how he did in just his last fight. And also with the resume, Nakathelas and Oscar Valdez. I don't know if that's enough. Like, you look at when Floyd was put on the biggest events, because I just told you Gervonta is entering that zone where he's like putting on the biggest events and, face of boxing status, right? Floyd was put in. Maidana beat Adrian Broner, made a lot of noise. Floyd fought him next. So that's the business that we're in now, where you want to rump with the biggest fighter in the game, or at the very least one of them, then you got to make some noise for yourself.
Agreed. You should keep the same standards when it came to David Benavidez and Canelo Alvarez. instead of yapping your mouth 24/7 about how Canelo is avoiding all the top competitors, even though he's fought repeated A-grade champion after repeated A-grade level champion. Very interesting how all of a sudden when it comes to Gervonta Tank Davis doing it, he does a complete 180.
That's how that works. It's not nothing new. Like, for example, in my opinion, El Rayo Valenzuela has a better chance of getting the Tank fight because he brutally knocked out a person.
Really? Mr. Jesse Valenzuela, whatever the fuck that dude's name is? Mr. Valenzuela? You mean the dude that was knocked out by Edwin De Los Santos? You're telling me that that's a bigger fight for Gervonta Tank Davis than that the Shakur Stevenson fight, Mr. Boxing Ego? Just stop.
That he allegedly lost to in Chris.
Once again, the point is that, you know, and I like Gervonta Tank Davis, but he's going to have to get in the ring with somebody eventually. The dude turns 30 years old this year, at least from what I remember. There's debatably no A-grade level names on his list. Let me also state this as well, because I always get these guys in my comment section that say, oh, well, he fought Gamboa, you know, and all sorts of, dude, Yuriorkis Gamboa was completely washed up. Like, don't even bring up that name. Gamboa had already lost by knockout 2 times at that point in time in his career. Like, at that point in time in his career, he got knocked out by a dude that I believe was like, what, 24-12 or something like that? Like, come on.
Colbert, and he stretched him, and to me, that was the knockout of the year. So just like Floyd fought Maidana after he beat Broner, dropped him twice, and took his O, that led to him getting recognized. It's no different than, let's say, I watch a lot of movies, right? So it's no different than when you see an actor and they're in a breakout movie role, and then
what the fuck is going on with this camera angle? What the hell is going on here? Ego must be a failed actor or something like that. You know, always with the impressions and the rapping and over all these fucking camera angles. Like, what the hell is going on in this video?
it seems to be on and popping for him immediately after that breakout role. Like they did, like let's say the dude from Get Out or something. That movie was a hit. It went on to make some money. So you start seeing him more and more because of that. Boxing is a business too, and it's a sport, but it's no different. That breakout actor, he's gonna start landing all types of roles because he just had a breakout role and everybody loved his work. And then it got Oscar nominated, and then he got the Oscar. That's how it works. You start seeing, and then you start seeing that.
Absolutely. And I agree with that. So you should keep that same energy when it comes to Canelo, you know, and some of the guys that he chooses to fight or not to fight, especially when it comes to that, you know, and you should keep the same energy all across the board.
Actor in every movie. Like, man, I remember this guy on Boardwalk Empire. He was on Breaking Bad. And then you start seeing him in big blockbuster movies and stuff. And then it's just on and popping. They got the glow, you know? And boxing's no different. I truly feel like El Rayo has a better chance of getting the Tank fight because he made noise. He took something where he was wronged versus Chris Colbert.
Well, he has more of a chance possibly of getting the Tank fight because they could possibly promote that fight, and then on top of that, they know that it's going to be an entertaining spectacle, and you know that Valenzuela, he's not going to last any more than 6 or 7 rounds. At least if Gervonta Tank Davis really wants to put it on him. But at the end of the day, Shakur right now is too dangerous, and on top of that, he's just too stylistically, you know, potentially troublesome overall for the amount of reward that he brings right now. So at the end of the day, if that fight is going to happen, Shakur is going to have to have better performances, and he's going to have to stick out, you know, in a major way. It's the same thing that Canelo was talking about to that of David Benavidez and Demetrius Bubu Andrade, and that's why eventually those two fought each other to get that Canelo Alvarez fight. And now David Benavidez is starting to stick out in a major way, and Canelo will eventually fight him.
And he outdid the first fight by brutally knocking him out and stretching him and posing like this at the end of it. So to me, I think he got a better chance than Shakur Stevenson and everybody.
And once again, isn't it very interesting that that, you know, oh no, it's Jose Valenzuela. My bad, it's Jose Valenzuela. That Jose Valenzuela, the same guy that got knocked out in round 1, I believe, against Edwin De Los Santos, you know, the guy that Shakur Stevenson just beat. If this was Canelo Alvarez taking that fight next, he would get his ass chewed out.
Hated the fight and said it was
at least
boring.
Overall by these LDBC and new media racist channels. Let's be real.
Including me. I don't think Shakur is a horrible fighter, but That's what he's up against. I'll talk about this more if you guys want. If you want me to keep talking, just say keep going. Type keep going in the comment section, and I'll talk about it some more. That's all I have to say for right now.
When you bundle your home or renters with your auto, Progressive...
But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. I just thought that that was a very interesting conversation. But I don't completely disagree with some of the stuff that Boxing Ego said. It's just interesting how now they do a complete 180 when it comes to Gervonta Davis. But then when it came to Canelo Alvarez, when it came down to it, or certain other fighters that they didn't like Tyson Fury, then it was a cherry pick. It was a duck if they didn't face those certain fighters. You know, not to be fair, I suppose that everyone right now with Canelo, they're all calling for the David Benavidez fight. Everyone is pretty much calling for the David Benavidez fight. Maybe not everyone is calling for the Shakur Stevenson fight, but at the end of the day, Tank Davis is going to have to fight somebody eventually. Because he just keeps getting in the ring with these B to C grade, level, let's be real, little Latino fighters. And it's like, come on, dude. Like no one wants to see these fighters. But it is what it is. And once again, I'm not really sure how great Gervonta Davis is really going to be remembered. Because with the LDBC and the media, what they want you to believe is that Canelo and Usyk and Fury and Inoue, that no matter what they accomplish, that they'll never be on the same level as some of these other fighters because of blah, 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 and all this other bullshit. But then Gervonta Davis and Terrence Crawford can get 3 to 4 A-grade wins in their career, and then they're up there with Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Sugar Ray Robinson. Like, it just doesn't work that way. It is what it is. You have to compare accomplishments and resume and overall who is the greatest of their era and who accomplished the most. And on top of that, of course, a great skill set as well. And I like Gervonta Davis. He's a great fighter. He's a great talent. But, dude, you're 30 years old. Like, you're going to have to start getting in the ring with some of those A-grade level fighters. Period. But it is what it is. Anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. And we'll see where this goes. Talk to you all later.